Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Noni Davis of St. C Academy. I am the current owner. I inherited this business from my mom, Sylvia Davis, and my father, the late William Edward Davis. In 1996, we opened St. C Academy, and I'm excited to say that we celebrated our 23rd, no, our 28th birthday on February 23rd, which also happens to be W.E.B. Du Bois's birthday. And so 28 years we've been working here in the Durham, North Carolina community, serving African American children, of African descent, but also African children off the continent and children from the African diaspora. And so we're excited about what we're doing, and hope to see a few more decades here. Uh, last week, let me start with last week. So last week, I started the discussion on Space Race, which is a documentary that has just been released on Disney Plus, and it focuses on the astronomical, I guess, the aeronautical engineering, aeronautical space expeditions that African Americans participated in over the last, I guess, 60 years. And it introduced uh, astronauts you may not have known. And it also introduced the Cuban astronaut who was the first African descendant person to go into space, but he went under the Soviet Union, and all kinds of amazing facts. But what they neglected to do was to show or introduce the African contribution to astronomy. And so last week, um, I introduced some of those topics, which have been taught here at CC Academy to my own students when we learn about the universe and space. And so I'll do a quick recap of what we covered. Um, Before European contact, Africans in all over the continent, the north, the south, the east, west, had already begun to develop a research, a interest in space. And so we had, prior to European contact, already established the our solar system was heliocentric, which means that it was sun centered, and that our planets orbited around the sun and not everything around the Earth, which was a European worldview. We also had identified 6 planets, including the Earth up to Jupiter. Um, we had established a lunar calendar, or which is also considered um, a math calendar or mathematical tool called the Ishango bone, and it was 25,000 years ago. And this is believed to have been developed by women who were learning about the phases of the moon. And I want to clarify the phases are full moon to gibbous, to third quarter, to um, crescent, to new moon, the one you can't see, back to crescent, back to first quarter, back to gibbous, and then back to a full moon. So that was those are the phases that our female ancestors were observing, and these were believed to be used to um, identify a correlation between the phases and their own menstrual cycles. We also and the Ashango bone was found in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Um, the In South Africa, they found the Adams calendar, which they believe that it can be dated back 75,000 years ago. Um, but of course, there's whenever African knowledge or discovery is made, there's always a speculation about when, and is it before or after Europeans. And so I try to ignore all of that, noise and everything. But 75,000 years ago is when that date is speculated, and that again is in South Africa. Then we had the Dendera, which I went into a lot of detail about. That was developed as a astronomical calendar, which with the the zodiac signs, but the correlation was not with um, necessarily personalities or things like we said. And I'm not want to make it clear. I'm not trying to disparage um, astrology, but the Dendera was an alignment with seasons. And so you had, for example, just a quick brief example, January was associated with Aquarius, was is also associated with the inundation or the flooding of the Nile River, or the yearly inundation of the Nile. And each one of the zodiac signs is correlated with some event that is happening on the earth in that region of ancient Kemet, Egypt. If you want to, for those who may not know about the word Kemet, land of the black people, but it was a correlation to some of the seasonal things that were going on with them, and they identified or created constellational patterns that related to what was going on the earth, on as in heaven as on earth. So then we also know the pyramids of Giza were also in alignment with Orion's belt. And then we know about the binary star system of the Dogon people who were in Mali, and that was a binary star system, which means that the stars are orbiting each other. And the Dogon people identified that star pattern and understood that it took 70 years for that cycle of orbit to complete itself. And they created celebrations, their cosmology, and their historical record of this star pattern or this star system. They called it Sigi Tolo, and Sirius A and Sirius B are the stars, but they called it Sigi Tolo and Sigi Polo. And it's possible that there might be a third star, but what was the most interesting about that particular fact, in my opinion, was that NASA within the last 20, maybe 30 years, also discovered that same orbit. And when you put the Dogon uh pattern, rotation pattern, astronomical pattern of the orbit, of these stars, it's the exact same as the NASA uh um, um depiction. And so I was like, wow. So it was extremely accurate. um the other thing that I wanted to do today, though, is that we know that flight is required if you want to go into space. And so um there was no nod, of course, in the series to African interest in flight. And so I wanted to introduce that. And so a number of my students are familiar also with the glider Sakara. So in 18, I think I've got it, 1898, um, Europeans were doing an archaeological dig in Egypt, in Saqqara, and they found the tomb of Padi Iman and and of course, they removed his artifacts. What can I say? Why are you tampering with grave sites? But anyway, so they removed these artifacts, and one among the artifacts was this glider. And I want to give you a quick view of that. And so if you can see, this glider is what they found, and it's only about 7 inches wide from the wingspan. And the body is not much. Well, I guess, what did they say? I didn't actually see the length of it, but it's about 7 inches long, and I don't know. I don't see it right off. But anyway, to move on. Um, so in 1969, a doctor, Khalil Messiah, Masiha. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, so please forgive me. But he was a PhD. He was also a member of the Egyptian Aeronautical Club, and he was a member of the Aero Modelers Club. So he had a lot of familiarity with aircraft and aeroplane design. And so when he saw this glider in the Cairo Museum, he was intrigued by its shape because he said, "Wow, this looks like a monoplane." And he noticed that there were some distinctions between it and the other bird-shaped um, artifacts that were in the museum. So he said, "Well, let me see if I can make a replica of this artifact and to see if it would fly because it looked like he said it had a monoplane design, the aeronautical design of a rounded nose and well, I guess it's not conical shape because sometimes things are, like rockets are conical shape, but this one was designed more like a plane. And then the span of the wings, and it was designed so it would have balance, except there was just one little piece missing off. But because according to his observations, he said, huh, it looks like it was designed to actually fly. So he created a model using similar materials and it flew. And I think they said it flew about 100 feet or something like that initially. And so that may need to be checked. But at any rate, it was able to fly a short distance. And so it is believed that Padi Iman may have been a person who was exploring flight in 200 BC. Um, we I think that what happens is when you don't introduce these ideas into even into these space race type documentaries, you're leaving out a significant part of the story and not giving African Americans, Africans, and and African diaspora children, as well as other groups who need to have like a respect for the contributions of African people. You just kind of smooth over it, and we're going to we're going to show you we just started what happened when we got to America, wherein there were things that we were doing before we got here, and uh, there was an intelligence before we got here. There was an exploration that was before we were brought to this land. And in fact, if we had not been brought to this continent, I'm just wonder what other. I mean, I just speculate as to what we could ever created with if we hadn't had that 400-year interruption here on the continent. Instead of being able to pursue intellectual and creativity that would have enhanced um, the world, had to be mired in this survival mode. And so when you're in survival mode, you don't have time to sit and think about the things that you can create. So in my opinion, this was very detrimental. That's another reason why the slave trade was so detrimental, because it not only killed our ability or destroyed our ability to be able to have these momentous creative opportunities because we were mired in foolishness, but it also, because of the dogma, because of the racist systems, it also tr- tried to indoctrinate us to think that it wasn't something that we were even capable of imagining. And so when we see these pyramids, you're like, what? Black people did this? Oh my God. And then you learn about the Dogon and all of these other achievements. You're like, wow, now we're having to recalculate. And it doesn't mean we weren't doing things in the meantime. So one of the things I wanted to go on to now is that I think I gave a little bit of history of Benjamin Banneker, who was brought here, whose grandmother, and his story is so like just mind boggling. His great grandmother was born in Europe. I think she was English. She was a dairymaid, And her story is that she was falsely accused of spilling milk or stealing milk while she was milking a cow, and she ended up being forced on a ship and sent to brought to what we call America today, uh, to pay for her crime of stealing milk out of a bucket. Okay. Now, Benjamin Banneker's father was Bannockee. It's believed that he was from, his father was from Chad, but it was also believed that he was a son of a prince. So you got a son of a prince married to a dairymaid. Anyway, it's believed that he had a great deal of astronomical knowledge. And he was purchased at the end of Banneker's grandmother's indenture. She went and purchased an enslaved man, and this enslaved man happened to be Bannockee from Chad, who was a prince. All right. So the story goes is that his mother, who was the product of this marriage between this prince and this dairymaid, um, grew up, and she did the same thing as her mother. She went down and purchased an African man and married him, and then she had Benjamin Banneker. So Benjamin Banneker grew up in this household of this African man and probably another African man who had in irrigation knowledge and had astronomical knowledge, at which they passed on to him. And so in the 1700s, I think it's Annapolis, Maryland is where he lived. It's in Maryland. And he was free. Benjamin Banneker was a freed African during that time. And he was able to do all kinds of amazing things. He wrote an almanac, and he was able to predict a solar eclipse. He It was, interesting to even have his work published. I think there was a lot of advocacy from Quaker community and abolitionist communities to have his work published. He also constructed the first clock. I think it was called the Old Ben. And that clock worked and operated for 40 years. He made a design of the clock based on a watch that he found and made a clock for the city. He also wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson uh, chastising him about the Declaration of Independence and failing to include the freedom of African people from bondage while they were trying to seek their own freedom from England at that time. And so, of course, Thomas Jefferson was like, "Oh, I'm glad that you're a smart black guy, but I don't know. I need these people to work for me." So anyway, for free. And so, but so even in spite of Benjamin Banneker's achievements, he was still his uh achievements were dismissed to a degree. But he also did, I think it was I can't remember who it was that hired him, but he was also a contractor or a surveyor for Washington D.C., and he is responsible for the design of the capital city of Washington D.C. If you go to Howard University's campus, they have a Benjamin Banneker. I think it's a park and community area it right across the campus of Howard University. So they make a serious nod to Benjamin Banneker's achievements. But that's who this man was. But he had an intent. He studied astronomy, and he was one of the first African scientists that was acknowledged here in the United States back in the 1700s. And then to move forward, I wanted to talk about Charles Page. Now, this gentleman just came to my awareness within the last month. Um, Charlie Page, I encourage you to look up Charlie Page, Page. E is his last name, and Benjamin Banneker, Banneker, something like that, or Banneker, something like that. That's Banneker. And then the glider Sakara is Saqara. I encourage you to look up those terms, and other of any of the other information I have offered to you. The Dendera, that is Dendera. Look those up, to learn this information. But Charlie Page, I want to conclude with him. So in 1903, oh, let's start with this. 1864 is when Charles Page was born. So he was born during the time of enslavement. However, he it said that he observed. He used to love to sit and watch insects and watch natural nature and things that were flying. But he was obsessed with insects, and so by 1903, he had designed and built a flying model of an airship, and based on these observations. And so when you consider butterflies, dragonflies, hummingbirds, what else? Uh, bee, bumblebees, and so depending on what you're looking at, you can see with helicopters, to me, and drones kind of operate like hummingbirds and bees, the way that they can move side to side, and also I'm trying to think what else is that, dragonflies. And so when we're in, like, this glider's a car, looks like a falcon, maybe a hawk or something like that, is the way it's designed. But a lot of these inventions of these new craft are based on what people are seeing in nature. And so Mr. Charles Page, designed and built a flying model based on his observation. And then he submitted a full scale model in 1904 to the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, his his model never, his full scale model never arrived. And it is said that somewhere between his home and the expedition by train, his model completely disappeared, and they have never been able to find it. But what else is significant is that he did file a patent, and his patent was filed in April of 1906, before the Wright brothers. Um, the it's an airship, and it was supported by two huge balloons, and it looks just like a boat on the bottom. And but I encourage you to look at this patent, and to know that, in all my years of teaching aeronautical science and astronomy and all exploration of the universe, that this is the first time I've heard about, this man really does speak to the this this insanity of denying Black people their history, denying the world the history of Black people. And I hate to say contributions, because a lot of this is just stuff that we were doing. It's our interest, just like anybody else. And we were just trying to learn more about the world around us, and how we could mimic some of these things that we see, and how we could develop them into something that could benefit all mankind. And instead of allowing us to have that that spark of creativity, and that spark of intrigue, and investigation, we really were just relegated to these spaces, these side little corners and stuff like that. Many of us still rose above it, but this idea of that was an anomaly, or that was somebody who was special, or that was someone who got a break, wherein, why doesn't it benefit all of us to be able to pursue our own vision and our own dreams and our own interest in science and engineering? um which is what we try to do here. Whatever at the beginning of every school year, academic school year, we start with science, and so I encourage my students to come up with their own science projects. I, what are you interested in? That's my premise, and then let's go through a scientific method to help you explore your own interest. Um, some of the children are interested in engineering that you never would have thought. Some of it, because it's not based on gender or anything like that. What do you want to do? What are you interested in? Uh what made you say, I wonder how that works? And so we work very hard at the beginning of the year. They're learning science. They're introduced to 30 different fields of science and 30 different indigenous, African American, African diaspora scientists that are in those 30 fields of science. But also now I want you to become a science, or think like a scientist, and learn something about an area that you may not have ever considered, but now is your opportunity. And it's through your own, your own mind, your own concepts of what is interesting. I don't want to frame it and give you a list of things to choose. I want you to come up with your own idea. And when we do that, we give our children a lot. It builds their confidence, it builds and it's okay if the science project, the experiment that they create to go with that project, it, it doesn't work. It's not about that. It's about going through the process and then examining that project, and did it work? Did it not work? What else could I have done? And so you get to evaluate your own a project without thinking that you made mistakes. It's about the learning process and modifying your work and trying to see what else could you have done, and to make it better. And so one example I want to give is I had a student who had gone down to the ocean in Florida, and she was curious as to why the water in one area was clear, and why was the water in some other areas murky. What was the difference? And I said, well, what do you think it is? She said, I don't know. I said, well, do the research. And so she ended up creating a water filtration system that was natural, to see how to learn about the different things that may be in the water naturally that would filter it, where in water in other areas may be murky because they're the same materials, like rocks or coal or sand or whatever, may not be in that particular area the way they are showing up in another area. What plants are in that area versus plants that are in the other area. So she was able to study this topic, create an experiment with it, and then she learned all on her own why water is clear in some parts and why water is murky in the other. And this had nothing to do with me. It was their own study. So, this information is necessary for our students, for our children, and not just Black children, but children of all races, to understand and see the value. Well, we don't really want to prove it to anybody who we are, because we should already know that. But just to let them know, uh, we great. We did things, and whether you affirm us or not is not important. But you should know what we did and what we accomplished in those days, in days past, and right now, and what we're capable of doing in the future. And that's it. I say thank you for joining me. Peace.
My advice to women seeking leadership roles in technology is to be confident.
I would recommend to speak up.
I think it's really important as you pursue a role in technology to have unshakable optimism.
I can't stress enough the value of mentorship.
When I think about any large career move, I ground it in 3 pillars, and that is purpose, potential, and people.
Use your voice, raise your hand, and be confident in your own abilities.
Just speak up. Say what you feel, say what you think. Don't be intimidated by men around the table or other people more senior than you.
Enjoy solving problems. Each and every single day, depending who you're working with, you need to be able to enjoy that process.
Find females who will support you and share their experience as to how they navigated the tech industry and how they're currently navigating the tech industry.
Your voice matters, your opinion matters, and you're there for a reason, so use that.
But when you have a clear sense of purpose and a clear sense of why, not only does it help you go through your crucible moments, it actually inspires your team to rally around you.
Be an FIO person, which just means figure it out. You may not know, but find a way and get it done.
Women tend to be less likely to apply for promotions, to speak up in meetings, or apply for new roles if they don't feel like they have all of the skills required to be successful. The fact of the matter is, seldom does anyone, so why couldn't that opportunity be yours?
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you, I thank you, for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
I won't fold.